At her own wedding, in a room full of 200 people, a bride pointed at her mother and had her removed. Not a stranger, not a guest who caused a scene. Her mother, the woman who raised her, who sat in the front row at every school play, who worked double shifts to pay for that dress, pointed at her, in front of everyone, and had security walk her out. And the most devastating part, her mother went quietly, because she was carrying something she had carried for 30 years. And she knew, before anyone else in that room knew, that the truth was about to destroy the man everyone was celebrating. Drop a comment right now and tell us where in the world you are watching from. And if you are not subscribed to Turning Point Tales, hit that subscribe button now. Go back 30 years. Claire was born on a Thursday in March. Her mother Joyce was 26 years old. Her father Raymond was 28. They were not married. Raymond wanted to be. He proposed the week Joyce told him she was pregnant. Down on one knee in the kitchen, completely sincere, Joyce looked at him and said no, not because she did not love him, because of something she knew that Raymond did not, something she had been carrying for 3 months before she told him about the pregnancy. She had seen Raymond at a restaurant with another woman, sitting the way people sit when they are not colleagues and not friends and are not careful enough in public. She had not confronted him. She had gone home, sat with it, and in the weeks that followed had been watching with the particular attention of a woman who already knows the answer and is simply confirming it. She confirmed it. Raymond was not who she thought he was. She turned down his proposal, refused to explain fully, said only that she needed to raise this child on her own terms. Raymond fought it. For 2 years he fought it. Then he met someone else, married her, moved to a different city. Claire grew up knowing her father existed, but not knowing him. She knew his name. She had 3 photographs, 1 birthday card that arrived when she was 7, and never again after that. She blamed Joyce. Not at 7. At 7 she was too young. But at 14 she started asking. At 16 she started accusing. Why did you keep me from him? Why did you say no when he asked? Why do I not have a father? Joyce said, your father and I were not right for each other. That is all. Claire said, that is not all. That is never all. She was 16, and she was right. That was not all. Claire found her father at 22, on her own, through a social media search that took 40 minutes and produced the result she had been looking for since she was 14. Raymond, married, 2 other children, a life that looked comfortable and complete. She sent a message. He replied within the hour. They met 3 weeks later at a coffee shop she chose. Raymond sat across from her and looked at his daughter for the first time in 15 years. He said, your mother never gave me the chance to be in your life. Claire looked at him. She said, tell me everything. He told her his version. A man who had wanted to do right, who had proposed, who had been turned away without explanation, who had eventually accepted the silence because fighting it was costing him everything. Claire drove home from that coffee shop and did not speak to Joyce for 6 weeks. When she finally called, she said, you kept him from me. You made a decision for me before I could make it for myself. Joyce said, Claire, there is something. Claire said, I do not want to hear it. I have heard enough. She put the phone down. The relationship between Claire and Raymond grew, slowly, then faster, with the particular hunger of someone filling a space that had been empty for 20 years. Joyce watched it happen. She did not interfere. She did not call Raymond. She did not correct the version of events he had given Claire. She simply stayed. Available, present, waiting, hoping that at some point Claire would ask the question that would open the conversation Joyce had been waiting 30 years to have. Claire did not ask. She was too busy building something with the father she had found. By 25, Claire was close to Raymond in the way you become close to a parent you discovered late, intensely, defensively, refusing to examine the foundation too closely because the foundation is new and you are not ready for it to be anything other than solid. By 28, she was engaged to Daniel, a man Joyce liked, a man who was steady and honest, and looked at Claire the way Raymond had once looked at Joyce before she found out who he was. Joyce was invited to the engagement dinner. Raymond was also invited. They sat at opposite ends of the table. Joyce looked at Raymond across the table. He did not look at her. The wedding was 6 months later. In those 6 months, Raymond inserted himself into every decision. The venue, the flowers, the seating chart. He had opinions about everything. He was making up for lost time. That was how Claire saw it. Joyce saw it differently. She saw a man performing fatherhood for an audience of one, while standing on a version of events that had never been examined. She said nothing. She bought her dress. She showed up to every meeting she was invited to. She smiled in every photograph. 2 weeks before the wedding, Aunt Helen called Joyce. Helen was Joyce's older sister. She had been there. At the restaurant, 30 years ago. Not with Joyce. She had been there with her own husband at a table nearby. She had seen Raymond with the other woman. She had told Joyce that same evening. And she had kept quiet ever since, because Joyce asked her to. Helen said, "Joyce, he is giving a speech at this wedding. He is going to stand up there and talk about being kept from his daughter. You know what he is going to say." Joyce said, "I know." Helen said, "Are you going to let him?" Joyce said, "It is Claire's wedding." Helen said, "And what about Claire's truth?" Raymond gave his speech at the reception. It was polished, emotional. The room was moved. He talked about the years lost, the daughter he had searched for, the obstacles he had faced. He did not name Joyce directly. He did not need to. Everyone in the room who knew the story knew who the obstacle was. Claire looked at her father during the speech with an expression that broke Joyce's heart. Complete trust, complete love. The face of a daughter who had finally found what she had been missing. Joyce sat at her table, held her champagne glass, and made a decision she had been putting off for 30 years. She stood up. She walked to the microphone. Raymond stepped back. The room went uncertain. Joyce looked at her daughter. Claire's expression shifted from confusion to warning. Joyce said, "I have one thing to say. It will take 2 minutes. Then I will sit down." She looked at Raymond. She said, "30 years ago I turned down your proposal, not because I wanted to keep Claire from you, because 2 weeks before you proposed, I had already watched you with the woman you were seeing behind my back." She said, "I did not want my daughter raised by a man I could not trust." Raymond said nothing. Joyce said, "I never told Claire because I was protecting her. From a version of her father she might not have been ready to know." She looked at her daughter, said, "I was wrong to protect you from the truth. I should have told you. I am sorry for that." She set the microphone down. Then Claire stood up, said, "Security, please escort my mother out." Joyce walked out. But Aunt Helen did not sit down. Helen stood up from her table, said, "She is telling the truth," said, "I was at that restaurant 30 years ago. I saw Raymond. I told Joyce that night." She said, "I have been quiet for 30 years because Joyce asked me to be. I am not quiet anymore." The room was completely still. Daniel looked at Claire. Claire looked at her father. Raymond's expression had nowhere to go. He said nothing. He did not need to. His face said it. Claire found Joyce in the car park. Joyce was sitting in her car, engine off, hands in her lap. Claire knocked on the window. Joyce unlocked the door. Claire got in the passenger seat. They sat in the dark car park while 200 people were still inside. Claire said, "Why did you wait until tonight?" Joyce said, "I waited because you were never ready to hear it, and I was never brave enough to make you ready." Claire said, "He told me you kept him from me." Joyce said, "He was not wrong about that. I did keep him from you. I made that decision, and I lived with it, and I would make it again." She said, "What I would not do again is let you spend 20 years believing the reason was me." Claire sat with that. For a long time. She said, "He gave a speech in there about lost years." Joyce said, "I know." Claire said, "While you were sitting there knowing." Joyce said, "Yes." Claire asked one question, She said, "Did you love him?" Joyce looked at her daughter, said, "Very much." Said, "That was the part that made it so hard." Claire looked at the steering wheel. She said, "I am sorry I had you removed." Joyce said, "You were protecting your day." Claire said, "I was protecting the wrong thing." Joyce reached over, put her hand on her daughter's, said, "You have a good man in there." Said, "Go back in." Said, "We will talk. When you are ready. All of it." Claire sat another moment. Then she got out, walked back toward the doors. At the door she stopped. She turned around. She said, "Mum." Joyce looked at her through the windscreen. Claire said, "I am going to need you to explain this to me every year until I fully understand it." Joyce said, "Every year." Claire nodded, went back inside. 30 years. That is how long Joyce carried the weight of a truth she thought she was protecting her daughter from. She was right about Raymond. She was wrong about silence. Because silence does not protect people. It just delays the moment when the truth has to fight harder to be heard. When it finally spoke, it chose the worst possible moment, and the most necessary one. Raymond left the wedding early. He did not speak to Joyce. He did not speak to Helen. He got into a car, and he drove away, and the version of himself he had spent 30 years maintaining drove away with him. Claire called Joyce the following Sunday. They talked for an hour. Not about the wedding, about the restaurant, about the proposal, about the decision Joyce made at 26 when she looked at a man she loved and chose her daughter's foundation over her own happiness. That was the truth. Not perfect, not clean, but true. Some mothers do not protect their children by giving them everything. They protect them by standing in front of something harmful and saying nothing, because the child is not ready, and waiting until the child is strong enough to hear what the silence was for. Joyce waited 30 years. The truth cost her a seat at her daughter's wedding, but it gave her something she had not had since Claire was 14. Her daughter's eyes, looking at her, without the question in them that had never been fully answered, finally answered. If you enjoyed this story, please like this video and subscribe to Turning Point Tales. We will see you in the next one.